My name is Catherine, and at the age of 34, I find myself residing in our family home with my mother since my father's passing 3 years ago. Despite the solitude, I made the choice to stay by my mother's side, deeming it too precarious to leave her alone. This commitment has kept me within the confines of our home for the past 3 years. During this time, a distressing episode unfolded when the most undesirable individuals paid an unwelcome visit to my mother and me. None other than my biological brother, Bob, and his wife, Jane. I've known my brother since birth, and Jane, his wife, became familiar to me during their dating years, as Bob often brought her home during vacations. To be frank, I cannot erase the memories of these two individuals from my mind. Regrettably, my brother and Jane had a history of tormenting me for their amusement. With my parents frequently occupied with their jobs, weekends were often devoid of their presence. This absence became the opportune time for my brother and his wife to subject me to cruel games. Our family home, an expansive mansion constructed by our CEO father, became the setting for one such distressing event. One day, they played a cruel game of hide and seek, urging me to hide in a closet. To my dismay, they promptly filled the closet with items, trapping me inside until just before my parents' return. This ritual led to frequent scoldings from my mother for the disorder in the closet. Although the closet incidents ceased after my mother caught them in the act, their harassment persisted. My resentment extended not only to my brother and Jane, but also to my parents, who seemed indifferent to my plight. In middle school, their vindictiveness escalated as they destroyed my school uniform, defaced my textbooks, and ruined my cushions and beddings. I later discovered that their actions were fueled by their frustration over poor exam results and parental reprimands. In the midst of my shattered room, bewildered and questioning why I endured such torment, I felt abandoned and wondered why no one would come to my aid. The breaking point came when, refusing to join the family for dinner, my mother discovered the extent of the destruction in my room. My tearful plea to leave the house exposed the depths of my despair, with no one seemingly willing to help me. Bob and Jane always team up against me, wrecking everything from my toys to my study materials and clothes. I can't bear living in this house any longer. Both Mom and Dad, you're no help. You won't stand up for me. Maybe it was the first time I let my tears flow freely in front of my family. Until then, I'd silently endured, shedding tears in solitude even in the toughest moments. But now, I cried out loud like a child. Seeing me in distress, my mother embraced me, expressing regret for everything that had happened until then. Even my brother, witnessing the scene, seemed to grasp the severity of the situation. He attempted to flee, but my father stopped him, gripping him firmly by the collar. "Do you realize what you've done? This is a serious matter." My father's voice was low but chilling. Bob attempted to downplay their actions, claiming it was merely playful behavior gone too far. "Destruction of property is a crime," my father retorted calmly. "You need to understand the consequences and make amends." Bob protested, citing his status as a minor, but my father reminded him that parents bear the responsibility for their children's actions. With a heavy sigh, my father mentioned the option of Bob living with his uncle, who happened to be my father's younger brother. This uncle was known for his stern demeanor and intolerance towards mischief. He was feared by all the neighborhood kids, akin to a boogeyman. While he was kind to well-behaved children like me, he had no tolerance for troublemakers like Bob and Jane. Predictably, Bob refused vehemently, claiming he would mend his ways. "I've heard that too many times." My father's voice was firm as he confronted Bob and Jane. "When you two locked Catherine in the closet, when you chased her around, when you threw bugs at her knowing she's afraid of them. Each time we learned of your actions, we scolded you, and you always promised to never do it again. But you did it anyway. We can't tolerate someone who hurts our family, even if they are family. Never set foot in this house again." With those words, my father grabbed Bob by the scruff of his neck and forcibly removed him from our home. Later, I learned that my parents had been infuriated by Bob's behavior. However, despite their scolding, Bob seemed oblivious to the gravity of his actions and continued his harassing behavior towards me. I came to the conclusion that he must be beyond help. Some people, like Bob and Jane, fail to comprehend the most fundamental societal norms. It was a bitter realization. Originally, Bob had plans to attend university on our father's dime after high school. However, our father, recognizing his behavior, intervened, predicting that Bob would only continue to harm others even in a university setting. Consequently, Bob ended up working at our uncle's company immediately after graduating from high school. It was evident that Bob was eager to escape our uncle's supervision. Upon finishing high school, he hastily rented an apartment with Jane, who had also just graduated. They embarked on their cohabitation journey, fully aware that neither their parents nor our uncle would provide financial assistance for rent or living expenses. Sometime later, for reasons unknown, Bob approached me, asking to borrow money. At that point, I had just entered high school and wasn't engaged in part-time work. The money I had diligently saved up, which Bob used to pilfer when we lived together, had been fully reimbursed by my parents, thanks to a detailed notebook I maintained. Despite having the money, I had no intention of lending it to Bob. In response to his request, I retorted, "Aren't you ashamed to be asking your high school sister for money? I'm not even working, so I don't have any extra money. There's no way I'm giving you any." I promptly informed both my mother and father about Bob's attempt to borrow money, and they were furious. They assured me that they would not provide any further assistance to him. I believe that Bob and Jane should learn to live independently without relying on others. Subsequently, I worked hard, attended college, and dedicated myself to my studies. After graduation, I joined a company where I continued to grow and learn. Busy with my own life, I had almost forgotten about Bob. However, just as I had moved on, an invitation to his wedding arrived at our house. The bride, unsurprisingly, was Jane. I thought to myself, oh, so those two are finally getting married, as my parents and I debated whether we should attend the wedding of a family member. However, a few days before the wedding, my father collapsed and was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. Although he had always been frail, this was the first time he had collapsed to such an extent, causing both my mother and me to panic. I reached out to my brother for support, but he callously replied, "I'm about to get married. Don't bother me during this crucial period of my bachelorhood." Even when I informed him of our father's urgent hospitalization, he dismissed it, insisting our father had merely tripped and urged us to make sure to attend his wedding. Shortly after, our father passed away, making it inevitable for a wake and funeral. My mother and I communicated to my brother that we wouldn't be able to attend his wedding. Despite his persistent requests for our presence, we decided to remain absent. We also informed Jane's parents about our father's passing and our inability to attend the wedding. While Jane's parents understood our predicament, my brother and Jane accused us of being disrespectful for not attending the wedding. The message left on my mother's and my voicemail was so absurd that it left me questioning who the true rude individuals were in this situation. While we were preoccupied with smoothly conducting our father's funeral, my brother and Jane proceeded with their wedding without considering our father's recent passing. From that moment on, my mother and I never explicitly addressed it, but we felt that our relationship with my brother had been irreparably damaged. However, out of nowhere, my brother appeared at our doorstep. Opening the front door in response to his claim of having a delivery, I was taken aback when my brother and Jane forcefully pushed past me, lugging large suitcases. "Hey, what's the rush?" I protested, but my brother seemed to have entirely forgotten our father's stern directive never to set foot in our house again. As they casually dropped their luggage in the hallway, they began spouting nonsense at me, insisting that my mother and I vacate the mansion immediately. What? Isn't Mom diagnosed with dementia? I couldn't believe my ears. This luxurious mansion isn't suitable for someone like her or a loser like you who never improves. It should be taken over by glamorous people like Jane and me, so you guys should leave right away. I was left utterly stunned. What on earth was my brother talking about? It had been 3 years since our father's passing, and he hadn't offered an apology. visited the grave, or made any efforts to reconcile. And now he was demanding ownership of the mansion while presuming our mother's dementia and planning to evict her. Speechless, I stood there as our mother emerged from a room in the back. "Catherine, what's going on?" she asked, bewildered. Upon seeing my brother, she said something utterly unbelievable. "Oh, who might you be? If you're a stranger, please leave," she declared. In response, my brother and Jane laughed mockingly, dismissing her behavior as a sign of worsening dementia. "See? This is how she is every time we call her. Her dementia must be getting worse. I'll leave it to you to take care of Mom." "You can have Mom. I'll take the mansion," my brother declared, callously laying claim to our family home. After asserting his claim as the eldest son, Bob confidently strolled deeper into the house, leaving me bewildered. Jane, following Bob's lead, turned to me and my mother, mimicking his arrogance. "Take the old lady and get out. I never want to see you again," she declared. Rushing to my mother's side, I asked if she was okay. Subsequently, as if we were being forcibly driven out, my mother and I left the mansion, leaving behind the old furniture. Fortunately, a friend who heard about our situation offered us his vacant house, explaining he was abroad and couldn't manage it. Originally, his cousin cared for the house, but with his impending relocation, the timing aligned perfectly. Upon settling into the new house, my mother and I finally felt at ease, taking a deep breath. Laughing, my mother suggested selling the mansion outright, stating that she still disliked Bob and Jane's behavior. I questioned her about Bob's claim that she had dementia, and she revealed a surprising truth. 2 years ago, Bob and Jane incessantly asked her for money, that they didn't attend their father's funeral, and never contacted her afterward. Frustrated by their audacity, she pretended not to know them and treated them as strangers, leading Bob and Jane to misinterpret her actions as signs of dementia. Deciding it was wrong to evict someone presumed to have dementia, my mother promptly arranged to sell the mansion. A senior executive from my father's company, where I was undergoing training as a successor, expressed interest in buying it. A real estate acquaintance, and I explained the situation to the buyer's executive, and they agreed that leaving Bob and Jane alone would jeopardize the house. The sale was progressing smoothly, and a week later, my phone and my mother's phone buzzed incessantly. Ignoring the calls for 30 minutes, we finally answered. Jane exclaimed, demanding to know why we didn't respond immediately. According to her, the mansion had been taken over, and strangers were trying to kick them out. I couldn't help but burst out laughing. Chuckling, I informed her that my mother, the rightful owner, had sold the house to a new owner. Stunned, Jane couldn't comprehend it. She desperately claimed that Bob owned the mansion as the eldest son. Laughing again, I pointed out that nobody had promised him ownership just because he was the eldest. Jane seemed to believe that being Bob's wife would elevate her status, but I corrected her about the reality of their low-level positions at the company. Jane's naive thinking left me amused. When she learned that Bob wouldn't inherit the company either, she pleaded for money. With a final laugh, I ended the call. Uncle later informed me that Bob and Jane clung to the mansion, refusing to leave until he personally picked them up. After being hired by Uncle's company, they underwent strict education, becoming so scared that they cried as Uncle took them away. They were left at a mountain retreat under Uncle's acquaintance due to their unpredictable behavior. Despite multiple escape attempts, they were caught each time. Uncle warned them that if they didn't straighten up, they would remain on the mountain for the rest of their lives. As for me, my fiancé, currently working abroad, managed the house on our behalf. We are planning our wedding ceremony soon, and my mother and uncle, who supported us, will be invited. However, Bob and Jane will not receive an invitation.